Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. I'm your guest host this week, Jim Rosica of City and State, Florida. Sitting in for Dara, who's on the injured list this week. We wish her a speedy recovery. On this abbreviated version of the podcast, I'll be talking about the 2026 race for governor, because why not, with the news service of Florida's Jim Turner. So stay tuned.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
All right, well, hello again, and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. Of course, I'm not Dara Cam, I'm Jim Rosica. You're listening to an abbreviated podcast this week with just me and Jim Turner here at the News Service of Florida. And we're going to be talking about a few things. Jim Turner, I think this is the first time we have had you on the podcast. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I think I probably need an introduction.
My colleague from across the hall, from across the aisle of the Terracotta Room, here in the luxurious combined News Service of Florida / City and State Florida offices in downtown Tallahassee, kind of like the combination Taco Bell and Pizza Hut here. We're going to talk about a few things. Jim, why don't you just briefly tell us about your work here at the News Service?
I read on everything from business to ag. We will do...
First of all, tell us, do you remember when you started?
I've been here almost 10 years. Started out with TC Palm, which was Stuart News. Was there for almost 20 years. Down in Jupiter, down in Stuart, covering everything. West Palm Beach Council, County Commission, Jupiter Town Council, covered CUPS.
So we
Martin County Commission.
We actually have a few things in common because we are both Jersey natives.
Yep.
And we are both what is now called TC Palm natives. I actually was at the then competing newspaper, which was then called the Fort Pierce Tribune. It had been called the News Tribune. I think it's again called the St. Lucie News Tribune. You were at the Stuart News back when the Fort Pierce paper was owned by Freedom, and the Stuart News was owned by Scripps, and we competed viciously against each other in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and we had competing St. Lucie County bureaus across the street from each other on PSL Boulevard, with the News on one side and the Tribune on the other, and now all of those newspapers...
Oh, it was more than that, because we also had the Palm Beach Post.
Oh, that is right.
That was my competition.
That is right.
In Palm Beach County.
The Palm Beach Post had a St. Lucie bureau.
And then correct. We teamed with the Sun Sentinel, so we were sort of trying to squeeze them.
Okay, that was after my time. I was an earlier '90s guy. I think you were a later '90s guy. But now all of those newspapers, including the Indian River newspaper, are owned by Gannett, a.k.a. the USA Today Network.
That's right.
And they're now our customers, actually, aren't
yes.
they? Well, good for them. Okay. Thank you, USA Today Network, for your patronage. Again, on the abbreviated version of this podcast, we're just going to talk about a few things. We're going to start with the news, the recent news that Don Gates, the former president of the Florida Senate, former state senator, is once again going to run for his old seat in the way western panhandle of Florida. In doing so, he has cleared the field, as we say. He would have faced competition from a fellow Republican by the name of Frank White, who is a former state House member, and after Mr. Gates made it be known that he was going to seek that seat, Mr. White took his name out of the running. So it looks like Don Gates, considering the political makeup of that district, is going to once again be a state senator.
I was going to say, I have a feeling that White would not have been the only candidate out there. It would have been an open seat. The current office holder, Doug Broxton, is term limited. So I have a feeling there was going to be a bunch of people jumping into that. And once, I guess he did a radio interview out there where the host has basically said, hey, you should throw your name in there. You're still active. The Gates name has been around for 30 years in that county. And he started out on a school board there and worked his way up. And so I think that you are going to see a lot of people were going to jump in. All of a sudden, he decided, I'll field some calls and we'll see if I want to run. And it took 2 seconds for people to call and say, yeah, run. And then he quickly, hey, Frank.
Yeah. And of course, we have to mention for those people who don't know, although I have to imagine that everybody that listens to this podcast does know, that he has a now famous son, another former Florida House member, Matt Gaetz,
who's sort of making some waves.
Sort of making some news these days. He is the U.S. representative for that part of Florida, and he has been all over the newspapers and other media about his ouster, the ouster that he sparked, rather, the motion to vacate, or MTV, as it has been unfortunately abbreviated to. Thank you for ruining my youth, whoever did that. And so he kind of sparked the ouster of U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, which, not to get too far afield, but it's entirely possible that he could once again be the U.S. House Speaker, but that's another story.
I have a feeling by the time this airs that they'll have picked, I mean, they've got their two, Solis and Jim Jordan and Steve Solis, which their caucus is interviewing. And that's all going to be done by the time this airs.
And so, dear audience, you may know more than we do by the time you hear this. That will be the case. Exactly. So, of course, as a result of Matt Gaetz's actions recently, he has been discussed once again as a possible next governor of the state of Florida. Obviously, we know that Governor Ron DeSantis, the incumbent, is term limited in 2026, and we pretty much expect on both sides of the political aisle that it's going to be a free-for-all who's going to be the next governor of Florida. Tell us a little bit about the actual likelihood of Matt Gaetz being a candidate for that office.
Well, I mean, I see the reports, but and Don basically said, oh, he's not focused on that right now. But in the world of politics, you're always thinking ahead, or you should be.
Absolutely true.
And Matt's name has been thrown around for some time by some people, especially in Tallahassee, where it's one of the names always rumored, along with everybody else from the Byron Donalds to Chief Financial Officer Jimmy Petronas, Attorney General Ashley Moody. I mean, just name Lieutenant Governor Nunez. All you have to do is just, here's somebody who's making news as a Republican. Republicans are growing in voter registration in the state. It's becoming, depending on how you want to label it, more of a red state. And so obviously Matt's one of those names that gets tossed a lot.
And obviously we our own Tristan Wood, who is our city and state staff writer, did a story that came out this Monday in which we talked about Matt Gaetz as a possible candidate, and we talked about Byron Donalds, who, as you just mentioned, and I think it's worth noting,
from Naples,
who his hometown newspaper, the Naples Daily News, did a story on him very recently, and he was asked about the possibility of becoming, would you ever consider running for governor one day? And according to the report, he said, "We'll see what happens." So have I thought about it? Of course I have. I think about everything. I really do. But you can't time politics. That's the other thing I've learned watching politics the last 16 years. If it comes around, I'll talk to my wife. We'll pray about it, look where we are, make a decision, and then away we go. And I guess we have to mention, obviously, at this point, that his wife is no stranger to politics or being in the news. Erica Donalds, his wife, who was for those who can remember this far back, it's only been a few years, but she was a member of the the state's Constitutional Revision Commission. She was also, I believe she was also was she also a school board member?
I think she was a school board member. Now.
Yeah, and she is very much involved in the parental rights movement, although she is not one of the she's not one of the main moms for liberty. But I think she is very sympathetic to that cause. That's a pretty powerful power couple right there. We'll be right back with News Service of Florida's Jim Turner.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
And we're back with Jim Turner with a moderate dive this week with me, Jim Rosica, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, Florida. Others, of course, I think you've mentioned, we think that Ashley Moody may be interested. Obviously, Jeanette Nunez. I have long joked that my dream matchup would be Jeanette Nunez versus Lauren Book in 2026. And in fact, Lauren Book is another one of the names on our list of speculations for 2026. She is the current Senate Democratic leader, daughter of veteran lobbyist Ron Book, and has gotten certainly got to become known on her own before she entered politics as the founder of Lauren's Kids. She has a very kind of horrible backstory of child sexual abuse by her then nanny growing up, but she turned that into
before she was political. She did the hike from Key West to Tallahassee, and that's sort of it would build up the name. Obviously, you had Daddy's influence up here, so always well connected.
Plus, they also do some kind of treadmill event every year.
Well, that's what it's turned into.
Okay,
that's what that's what it used to be, the hike statewide.
Okay,
and then because she now has to be up in the legislature, they've turned it into this first floor lobby. They bring in a bunch of treadmills, and people will be on the treadmills walking the distance.
I think one year I actually saw Ashley Moody doing her part on the treadmill in heels. I could be wrong. But I have that memory.
Yeah, it's a very bipartisan event.
It is a very bipartisan event, even nonpartisan event. Also we've talked about. I don't know if you thought about this. Donna Deegan, the virtually brand new Democratic mayor of Jacksonville, who won a pretty big office in Florida when most other Florida Democrats were losing.
Right, and the narrative would be against the red tide. So but I think that's where you also, I think you'd throw out Nikki Fried as one of the names, just simply because she ran 2 years ago. She's a name. I think she would be better off staying where she is. She's the chair of the Democratic Party. And identifying people like Deegan and promoting them, get 4 or 5 people and let those names rise. Because then if you go back to Donald's, he made the right comment where it's all timing. So I think the Democratic Party, Max Frost was on one of the late night shows last night talking about how the Democratic Party is sort of not dead, but we're just disorganized.
And Maxwell Frost,
the congressman.
You're speaking of the congressman who's the now famous Gen Z member of Congress from Central Florida, also a Democrat. Just elected in 2022.
But it's all. But I think the Democrats really need to be promoting their bench as quick as possible, because if we go back to Donald, you got Gates, you got Congressman Waltz. You've got all the cabinet members are all going to have massive advantage in name recognition.
All of the cabinet members and the lieutenant governor.
Possibly.
Sure.
But it's all just like if you go back a couple of years, before DeSantis ran, he was always right after he won governor, even before he had his massive win, the last election, there were already talk of him running for president. But it was, would he challenge Trump? And I think it all came down to you have to decide, is the timing right? And I think he thought the timing was right.
The only thing I wonder about Jeanette Nunez, for example, is she's so connected to South Florida. She has so many roots and so much affinity to South Florida. I wonder if that would dissuade her from actually being interested in running for the big chair.
I think a lot of people have talked about it. It all depends on what happens with DeSantis. I think if DeSantis becomes president, she becomes governor. And all of a sudden, her name recognition is instantly built up.
Good point.
I do think as lieutenant governor, that doesn't really buy you any credence. I mean, that's, it might buy you, especially in the current way the government runs up here, it might get her a college presidency. But
also a good point. Although I think if you stop anybody in the street, even in front of the Capitol, and ask them to name the last 10 lieutenant governors, I don't think they could do it.
No.
Okay, well, we will be watching the already race for governor 2026 as that develops. We said we were going to do an abbreviated episode this week, and so we are actually almost right at that time. So I'm going to start wrapping it up by just asking you. You cover the legislature,
right?
Can we say, are there any big issues already? This is a talk about abbreviated. This is an abbreviated committee week.
And next week's not looking to be that much different.
Okay.
But they're both the House and the Senate are in next week.
It's just the Senate
when this rolls out this week.
Okay.
But insurance, I would just, if there's the number one topic right now.
And you're, walking through the halls, talking to people in the back of committee rooms. But now Jim Boyd has said we're not really gonna take up anything major in terms of insurance. We're gonna wait to see how the overhaul plays out. That's the last report I read.
I think the cry from property owners continues to be something needs to be done. And I don't think they can just sit back and keep doling out.
Right.
Here's another $1 billion for reinsurance.
Right. So you will be surprised if we don't see something insurance overhaul related for the 24 session.
Something that symbolically they have to do.
Do you think that anybody has a magic bullet for this? I mean, if there were, it would have come up before now, I have to think.
And somebody could be tweeting about it all the time, and they would be, but I don't see anybody coming up with ideas.
Exactly. All right, so watch insurance and the 2024 session. All right, very good. All right, I did promise an abbreviated episode, so we're going to stop it there for this week. So Jim Turner, News Service of Florida, thank you for stepping in as our emergency guest host, and we will see what next week brings. Jim Turner, thank you again.
Well, thank you.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.